Hello everybody, I'm Christo and welcome back. This is another EU5 Dev Diary. I keep wanting to say EU4, EU5 Dev Diary trade and economics. Let's get straight into it. So, the economy. I've said this about other features. This is make or break. If they get the new trade system right, it's going to be so good. If they get the new production system right, and importantly, in kind of not exactly accessible, more engageable is what I want here. Something that it's possible to engage with without having to try and visualize insane production queues, right? That's what we need, because lots of these buildings, well, we'll get to it, but there's some production chains going on in here. So, as I mentioned, production. First off, you make stuff with RGOs. And again, this map, not a useful map, not a helpful map. But when you click on stuff and it highlights, if you want to find more lead, find out where the lead is, I can see how that would be useful. But in this format, it's just a load of pretty colors. But you get RGOs, and then you process those. Some of the RGOs is consumed as is, some are processed. And then there's some really cool stuff, like, for example, and here's an example of using this map, and it's actually helpful. These are all the clothes in the game at game start, which is kind of crazy. This is all the cocoa in the game at game start. So really cool that there's these proper monopolies. It's this island here, isn't it, that was given to the Dutch by the British in exchange for something big. Was it New York? I feel like it was a clove island, or was it a nutmeg island? Hang on, I gotta look this up now. That's right. The Indonesian island of Run, which made nutmeg, was swapped for Manhattan, and the island of Run gave the Dutch a complete monopoly on nutmeg. Pretty freaking cool. But yeah, I'm really excited to see how monopolies work. I feel like building a trade empire based on completely monopolizing spice, that would be so cool. But yeah, so unique items, goods with proper resource scarcity and things. Very, very cool. And there is a Colombian exchange, so you can potentially change what's produced. You know, maybe we want to start making some potatoes in Europe. They're very nutrient dense, good for smallhold farmers, I hear. No problems to be had. And yeah, gold being produced in historical places. Silver mines here. We'll pretend this is Scalets. All that good stuff. So yes, infrastructure and population affect your RGO output. That makes sense. More infrastructure, more developed area means you're going to be able to get more out of your RGO. Makes total sense. You can also see you specifically expand the RGO. That's what I mean by infrastructure here. Has a hard limit. I think that's controlled by development, amongst other things, in the province. Development being the kind of overall progression stat for provinces. Here you can see it does all kinds of things. Makes it harder to blockade, makes institutions grow faster, even makes people live longer. Well, I didn't know that. That's really cool. And so here is the Nile. We've got local benefits. So there's rice output increase because of the Nile Delta being a really fertile area. I didn't really know that they grew rice in Egypt. I picture wheat growing in Egypt, but it shows what I know, I guess. And then, yes, there's really impactful text. 66% iron output. I assume that's multiplicative, of course, so it won't actually be 66. There'll be other multipliers at play, but still pretty cool. Literacy gives potential increase to resource gathering operations, buildings, infrastructure, windmills, output of specific goods. Very cool. And this is where I'm a little concerned. I'm not losing my mind, but I'm a little concerned. The idea of managing production chains, like tools and wood into sand, sand into other buildings, it scares me. It scares me a little, because how am I going to keep all that straight? Is there a flowchart in game? That would be good. If you could actually see a production chart, flowchart, and you click on it and it highlights a certain section of it. But I don't think there is. I certainly haven't seen anything like that in the dev diaries. But this, I mean, if it works well, it works well. And if perhaps what you do is you just automate it. But if you're just automating it, why does it exist? And I think the answer is to drive historical outcomes and to incentivize certain player behavior, like conquest patterns. So if you know you're short on wood, you might engage in a campaign to acquire somewhere that's rich in wood resources and things like that, which could be good even if you're automating the output of that. But it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. How easy it is for me to say, okay, I understand that I have a shortage of X and therefore should do Y. Because I feel like it's going to be very, if you know, wood becomes sand in this case, wood becomes sand, becomes whatever, brick becomes, well, let's just say it's brick. If you're short on brick, how easy will it be to identify that the problem is not really a shortage of sand, it's a shortage of wood, which makes your sand pits less profitable? I don't know. And we'll see how viable that is. Yes, it's not static, evolves with growth and technology and challenges. That seems true and very, very cool. I'm happy about that. Very happy about that. Basic industry and raw material buildings. So we're going to go through the buildings. There's a load listed here. We're not going to go through all of them. We're just going to look at the actual types. So basic industry and raw material makes sense. Combines X to make Y or extracts X. Makes sense. Then we have irrigation, just make provinces better. So infrastructure buildings make provinces better, increase the pop capacity, more food production, things like that. Makes perfect sense. Then things like markets, places, give you trade advantage and trade capacity. We'll get into trade a bit further down this dev diary. Armories produce monthly manpower. Now that presumably does consume people to make the manpower, or like it takes staffing in order to make the manpower or something, because otherwise that seems like magic people, right? Which I don't think the game has. And then there are villages. That's interesting. Can only be built in rural, increase food capacity, peasant power bonuses, produce some of their own goods, but not as efficient. Okay, so these are the kind of things you probably don't want to build many of, but maybe you need them for laborers. Yeah, maybe you need them for laborers, because this 100, I assume, represents this village having a kind of surplus of 150 people, 50 going to soldiers and 100 going to laborers. And then you use that surplus to build more dedicated industry, perhaps. And then libraries, these are the kind of things you're going to use to try and stack up your literacy and things. Very cool. Religious buildings, right. Increases literacy only specifically for clergy. That's interesting. As well as raising max control. Interesting. Again, feeding into that whole kind of synergy between the estates and crown rather than direct competition, where building a temple increases the ability for the state to control a province, because state increased control also means clergy increased influence and income. A royal court, I assume this is quite expensive to maintain. It takes gold and silk, and I think that's glassware. So you can see how that would get expensive. The Seljuk silver mines, you can only build them in 2 particular locations, but they look like a bit like regional, what are they called? Regional administrations, local administrations in Mayor and Taxes, where they actually give a local proximity source, meaning areas around that will act like they're closer to the capital and therefore easier to control. Interesting stuff. Interesting stuff. And you can go up to 5 levels of that. So 20 proximity source could be interesting. Proximity is a scale between 0 and 100, I believe. Could be wrong about that, but I think so. And yes, many buildings will appear over time, and they will also upgrade. You can see you go through 4 levels on this particular building. I'm not sure what that chimney is meant to connect to, by the way. It makes sense. You've got 1 chimney, 2 chimney, 3 chimney, 4. But what is that chimney doing? Because it just seems like it goes to the ground. I'm not quite sure. Maybe there's a hole at the back. I don't know. And yeah, docks, proximity cost through port. So again, very, very mayor and taxes hours here. So that's cool. But yeah, getting more harbor capacity. You can build ships. Oh, limiting building ships to only places with docks. That's fun. That makes sense. That makes sense. And 1 shipbuilding capacity, so we can have parallel shipbuilding out of a big port. Very nice, very fun idea. And the fact that you want to synergize your docks with your cities that potentially have local sources of control, so you can have proximity. Because it seems like proximity works basically like runners in Mayo, where they leave a place, they have to get to a location, and if they go through a port and if it has a dock, then the proximity cost is less. So could be really, really cool. Flat minus 10% though. I assume you can't have very many levels of this, because otherwise if you could have 10 levels, it costs nothing to get a proximity through here, but it seems unlikely, right? And then yeah, there's hospitals, and if they lack resources, so in this case it's lacking mercury, it operates less effectively. The things that increase character life expectancy is interesting. I wonder how crazy you can stack those, right? Like if you stacked up a whole load of different things that cranked life expectancy in a province. Can you get, ancient emperors, liches? Probably can't go that crazy. There's also probably a cap, but and yeah, this is where my kind of fears come in. This list is too long to be actionable. We're only seeing about 25% of it. This list is too long for me to do anything about it, really. I guess I can just work on the ones that are top. Like pepper's really expensive. We should work on getting more pepper and horses. But I also need to know how much these deviate from. I need to know if how much the price of Prepper deviates from some average. But what would even be that average? Like global average or? Yeah, it's tricky. It's going to be. I don't feel confident to say that this will or won't be really difficult to interact with, but it's a long list of goods. It's a really long list of goods, and I am concerned about how the kind of just automate it will result in it being needless, or could result in it being needless, but we'll see. Markets. Okay. Something worth mentioning, by the way. I haven't watched any EU5 content, so I might be asking hypothetical questions that you already know the answer to, in which place, please do tell me in the comments. But yeah, I'm just going off reading this stuff, so. Markets. Okay, so I think this is the default markets. Yes. Markets are dynamic. They are based on cities. Access to that market is based on proximity to the city, along with all kinds of other things like terrain and ports and infrastructure and roads and so on. It's a really cool system. It's a really very cool system. You don't just want to have one big blob market, because then the stuff on the periphery is going to have really bad market access. Bad market access affects the, I think it affects the effective price that they can leverage. It's also when they, like how they are in the hierarchy of buying stuff. Like, you know, in games like Victoria 2 and 3, I think it's in both, you buy stuff based on prestige. Is that a thing in Victoria 3 actually? Maybe that's not a thing in Victoria 3. No, it's trade advantage. It's a whole different system. But if you're at the edges, people here buy it for cheap, and then this medium expensive stuff gets sold here, and you're just left buying the most expensive stuff, or maybe there's not even any left. Which is why you don't want to have just one big blob market, as I understand it. How those markets interact, and how you as a player can understand how they're interacting, and when it would make sense to split it into two different markets, how well that can be done, and how well the player can engage with that is going to be really interesting. Because there's a meme in EU4 about how some people pretend that trade is really complicated, despite it being extremely simple. In EU5, it's actually looking complicated. So if people couldn't handle EU4, because I know it's not a meme, some people genuinely think it's complicated, literally just send it all to an end node and transfer it through as many steps as possible. And you make like infinite money, and you break it because you get integer overflows. It's so simple. But in this game, it genuinely looks complicated. So how well people are going to be able to handle that increased complexity is going to be, it's going to be interesting. It's going to be interesting. But the dynamic system it's really cool. Don't let me sound like I'm doing it down. I think it's going to be extremely interesting. And how you can kind of manipulate other provinces into your market in a way that's advantageous for you potentially. I forget if they're not limited by nation boundaries. No, they're not. Definitely not. So it's going to be really interesting how you manipulate the market dynamics to your advantage. But moving on, so here's a market example, and again, how you engage with this is going to be interesting. And trade advantage, so again, this is kind of your who gets to trade first, as I understand it. Put a comma in that food stockpile. But it's going to be, I mean, yeah, we're going to have to get to grips with it before too much can be made of this. And yeah, fish is wildly cheaper than chili here, for example, which makes sense. What I don't know is how they're going to model the kind of drive to consume expensive and luxury goods. Because, I mean, these are both food, right? Why don't you just never eat chili? Over time, target price based on shift in supply and demand. Price is dictated by the balance. As much as 500% of base cost can go down to 90% of their base cost. Damn. That's a much bigger swing than Victoria. So much less of a kind of fudge that they actually have a base cost, because it can change so much more dynamically. That's cool. That's very cool. So then this is the interesting thing. Market dynamics. Vijayanagar here's market is kind of spreading and expanding because it's very powerful relative to some of its neighbors. And this is partly based potentially on free trade versus mercantilism, where mercantilism protects your markets and makes you worse at trading, and free trade weakens your markets in defensive, but lets you trade more. Now, the thing is, surely the amount you're trading hasn't the effect of defending your markets. Like if you're trading way more and you have more trade advantage and your burgers are trading way more, isn't that just going to defend your market? So it feels like free trade might be the easy win here, but we'll have to try it out. Maybe the amount you're trading has nothing to do with the ability to defend your market, and actually market protection is just a kind of abstracted purely into this and other modifiers. We'll see. So yes, as it says, you don't want to just blob everything, because then you have this market access limit. You want to build roads, you want to build infrastructure, all that good stuff. So here's the market access. You can see that the transportation distance to the best market is by far the most impactful thing there. And I think, again, that's distance modified by infrastructure and so on. And yes, it directly reduces the goods available, lowers output, diminishes local tax base. So it's generally lower market access, bad, very bad. Makes sense. So here you can see it's 0 in Oslo, and therefore, sorry, 0 access to Oslo from Hamarøy. So bad way. So trade. Simply put, trade is the movement of goods between markets. So that's interesting. It's between markets rather than within a market. So they're not, because in Mayo taxes, goods sell to market regions, and then those market regions sell back to provinces. So provinces sell goods to market regions, and market regions sell them back to provinces. Maybe that's not how it's working. Which would be interesting. Again, though, like this is a long list of trades. How do you possibly not automate this? I know you can automate it, but like, how do you interact with it if you don't automate it? And can you automate only part of it? Like maybe you want to automate everything, but you want to keep your whatever clothes to yourself and just let your upper classes get rich on. Well, yeah, but I mean, how does that help? Maybe it's like Victoria 3 where there's standard of living, but like let's say you make clothes and you monopolize it so that only the Dutch people are allowed access to clothes. Who cares? Like, what actual positive impact does that have for the Dutch people? That's what I don't know. This one I like because this Kronborg in Helsingør, the castle, which is around here, which enforced the sound toll, which you may have heard of from EU4, ships passing through here. I've been here. I've sailed through there. We didn't have to pay the toll, but we did visit the castle. It's cool. It's worth a visit. If you get the opportunity, I would go. It's the castle that Hamlet is based on. So yes, trade profit is measured by the price gap. Makes sense. You know, if you produce a lot of something, the price falls, you're able to profitably export it. Makes all kinds of sense. So yes, not everything is extractable in every market. Not every market will have these things. So there's necessarily going to be trade between them, which makes sense. Every nation competes for favorable trades through trade advantage. Highest trade advantage, first access to goods. So I don't know how this works in terms of like, if I have one higher trade advantage, can I just buy everything in a particular section, or is it weighted? I'm not sure. Yeah, the volume, it's going to be interesting. So the Vijayanagar market here, for example, we can see that they have, no one's using any trade capacity, I assume, because this is just like a simulation, but interesting. Not all markets are accessible. Whether a market can trade for another is dependent by trade range. Makes sense. Max distance they can trade, calculated from the respective market centers. Okay. As long as it has capacity, it trades with everyone. That it can, makes sense. And yes, nations are not the only ones that trade. The burghers also trade, and you can swing trade away from the nation doing it and towards the burghers. If you're automating it, what is the cost of that? I guess the revenue from trade goes to the burghers rather than to you, which is a cost, but we'll see. Designed to be dynamic, interconnected, and deeply strategic. And that's something that I didn't mention about buildings, which I think is true and cool, which is what buildings you choose to build is a big player lever. It's a finger on the scale of how your society develops, because it's going to empower certain classes, it's going to enrich certain areas, and I think that's really cool. And the same goes for trade. And this is a great one from Fala Loris, also known as Chapel Comics. Yes, I feel like this can only be a dig at Victoria 3, right? This one at least, because yeah, we love this stuff. So don't take the combat away from us. I said I can't like EU4 combat. Yeah, that's right. Victoria 5, Victoria 3 combat. But yeah, that's trade. My concern is, how does it play? Because yes, that all seems cool, but how you engage with it. And if the only way you engage with it is by automating it, what does it motivate you to do beyond what you've automated? Because obviously if you automate the actual trades, I guess what you're still doing is, I mean, the big one is buildings, right? It's buildings and conquest. So even if you've automated the sale of your cloves, you still are driven to conquer and develop clove production regions, which I think seems good. It seems good because that's the interesting bit. The actual handling all the individual trades, I mean, come on, it's insane. Maybe people will do it though. You know, people used to try and avoid on-arrival attrition by, you know, walking past a province and then stopping rather than just walking straight to the province and all that stuff. So we'll see. We'll see. People do some crazy, crazy levels of micro. But that's trade and economics in EU5. Thank you so very much for watching, and I will see you